Dorothy and Frank Martinez had been married for 51 years. They lived in a small ranch house in Arizona, the same house where they'd raised their two daughters. At 76 and 78, they depended entirely on their Social Security checks, $2,847 combined each month. It wasn't much, but they had learned to make it work. They budgeted carefully, clipped coupons, bought generic brands, and never spent a penny they didn't have to. Every second Wednesday of the month, like clockwork, their Social Security deposits arrived. Dorothy would check their bank account in the morning, see the money, and feel that familiar sense of relief. They could pay the electric bill, buy groceries, refill Frank's heart medication, and her insulin. For another month, they would be okay. But on the second Wednesday of November, when Dorothy logged into their bank account, the balance showed $83.19. She stared at the screen, certain she had made a mistake. She refreshed the page. Still $83.19. "Frank," she called out, her voice tight with panic. "Frank, come here." Frank emerged from the bedroom, moving slowly with his walker. He'd had a stroke 2 years ago that left his left side weak. Dorothy had cared for him through the recovery, and though he could walk and talk and live independently, he tired easily and needed her for almost everything. "What's wrong?" he asked. "The money didn't come. The Social Security, it's not there." Frank lowered himself into the chair beside her and peered at the computer screen. His eyes weren't what they used to be, but he could see the numbers clearly enough. $83.19. "That can't be right," he said. "Call the bank." Dorothy called. After 20 minutes on hold, a bank representative confirmed that no deposits had been received that day. "The problem wasn't with the bank. You'll need to contact Social Security," the representative said. Dorothy hung up and immediately dialed the Social Security Administration. The automated system informed her that the wait time was over 2 hours. She pressed the buttons to stay on hold, set the phone on speaker, and waited. Frank sat beside her at the kitchen table, his face pale. They both knew exactly how much money they had. $83.19 in the bank. Maybe $40 in cash in Dorothy's purse. The property tax bill was due in 10 days, $1,200. The electric bill was due next week, $187. Frank's medication refills would cost $240. Dorothy's insulin was running low. "We'll figure it out," Frank said, taking her hand. But his voice wavered. After 2 hours and 37 minutes, the call disconnected. Dorothy tried again. Same message, same wait time. By the time they gave up, it was past dinner time, and neither of them had eaten. Dorothy made grilled cheese sandwiches with the last of the bread and cheese, and they ate in silence. That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She lay beside Frank, listening to his labored breathing, and felt fear close around her like a vice. They had no savings. Those had been drained when Frank's stroke required weeks of rehabilitation that Medicare didn't fully cover. They had no credit cards. They'd always been too responsible, or maybe too scared, to have debt. They had nothing but those Social Security checks. And now, those were gone too. The next morning, Dorothy was on the phone at 7 a.m. sharp when Social Security's lines opened. After an hour and 50 minutes on hold, she finally reached a representative named Kevin. "My husband and I didn't receive our Social Security deposits yesterday," Dorothy explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're checking to see if there's a problem." Kevin asked for their Social Security numbers. Dorothy heard typing, then a long pause. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm showing that both your benefits and your husband's benefits have been flagged for review." "Flagged? What does that mean?" "It means there's a question about your eligibility. According to the notes, you're required to verify your marriage status and provide proof of residence before benefits can be released." Dorothy felt her stomach drop. "We've been receiving benefits for 11 years. Why would you need that now?" "I don't have that information, ma'am. I just see the flag in the system. You'll need to submit documentation, a marriage certificate, utility bills, proof of address." "How long will that take?" "Once we receive your documents, the review process takes 4 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Dorothy's voice rose. "We can't go 6 weeks without income. We have bills due now. My husband needs his medication." "I understand your concern, ma'am, but this is the process. I can send you a letter explaining what documents are needed. Can't you just look at our records? We've been in the system for years. We've never missed a payment or had a problem. I'm sorry. The flag requires documentation. There's nothing I can do without it. Dorothy hung up and immediately started crying. Frank, who had been listening from the couch, tried to get up to comfort her, but his legs gave out, and he fell back into the cushions. Don't get up, Dorothy said, wiping her eyes and going to him. I'm okay, we're going to be okay. But she didn't believe it. Over the next week, Dorothy and Frank descended into crisis mode. They gathered every document they could find: their marriage certificate from 1973, utility bills, bank statements, driver's licenses. Dorothy made copies at the library, filled out forms she barely understood, and mailed everything to the address Social Security provided. Then they waited. Meanwhile, their bills came due. Dorothy called the county tax office and explained the situation. The clerk was sympathetic but firm. If they didn't pay the property tax by the deadline, penalties would start accumulating. Eventually, if unpaid, they could lose their house. Dorothy called the electric company. They gave her a 2-week extension, but after that, service would be disconnected. Frank's medication ran out. Dorothy called his doctor's office, explained that they couldn't afford the refills, and asked for samples. The nurse found enough to last a week, maybe 2. Dorothy's insulin was a bigger problem. She needed it to survive, and it cost $340 for a month's supply. She had enough for 5 more days. Their daughter Lisa, who lived in Texas with 3 kids, and a husband who just lost his job, sent $300. It was money Lisa couldn't afford to send, but Dorothy accepted it, because she had no choice. It paid for Dorothy's insulin, and a few groceries: rice, beans, pasta, the cheapest food they could find. Every day, Dorothy called Social Security. Every day, she was told the same thing: your case is under review. There's no way to expedite it. You just have to wait. By the 3rd week, they had $12 in the bank, and nothing left in the house to sell. Dorothy started skipping meals so Frank could eat. She told him she wasn't hungry, that her appetite wasn't what it used to be, but the truth was, she was dizzy with hunger and fear. Frank knew. He tried to share his food with her, but she refused. They argued about it, quiet, desperate arguments that left them both in tears. I can't watch you starve yourself, Frank said one night, and I can't watch you die because you didn't get enough food. Dorothy shot back. You had a stroke, Frank. You need to eat more than I do. This isn't living, Dorothy. This is just surviving. Barely. She took his hand, feeling how thin and fragile it had become. I know, but right now, barely surviving is all we can do. On the 28th day, without income, Dorothy found Frank on the bathroom floor. He had tried to get up in the night, and fallen. He was conscious but couldn't move his left side at all. The stroke symptoms had returned. Dorothy called 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. The paramedics were kind and professional as they loaded Frank onto a stretcher. One of them noticed Dorothy swaying and asked when she'd last eaten. Yesterday, she lied. It had been 2 days. At the hospital, doctors stabilized Frank and admitted him for observation. He hadn't had another stroke, but the stress and malnutrition had weakened his body enough that his previous stroke symptoms had worsened. He would need to stay for several days, possibly weeks. A social worker came to talk to Dorothy in the waiting room. Her name was Maria, and she sat down with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Mrs. Martinez, the doctors tell me your husband is malnourished. Are you having trouble affording food? Dorothy almost lied again. Pride, shame, a lifetime of being self-sufficient, all of it pushed her to say they were fine. But she was so tired, so worn down, that the truth just spilled out. Our Social Security was suspended a month ago. Some kind of review. We're waiting for it to be reinstated, but we don't have any money. No food. No way to pay bills. I don't know what we're going to do. Maria wrote notes, her expression growing more troubled. Have you applied for emergency assistance? Food stamps? Medicaid? I tried. They said we make too much because of our Social Security. But we're not getting Social Security right now. That's a problem with the system. It looks at what you should be receiving, not what you are receiving. Maria set down her clipboard. Let me make some calls. There are emergency funds available for situations like this. It's not much, but it might help. Dorothy nodded, too exhausted to feel anything. She spent that night in Frank's hospital room. sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, waking every time a nurse came in to check his vitals. The next morning, Maria returned with news. She'd found an emergency fund that could provide $500, enough to cover some groceries and utilities. She'd also contacted a local food bank and a charity that helped elderly people in crisis. This should help for a few weeks, Maria said, handing Dorothy information sheets. But Mrs. Martinez, you need to understand something. Your husband can't be discharged home in this condition, not without proper nutrition and care. If you can't provide that, we'll have to look at other options. What kind of options? Dorothy asked, though she already knew. A nursing facility, temporary placement, until you get back on your feet financially. No, Dorothy's voice was sharp. We're not going to be separated. We've been together for 51 years. I'll figure something out. Maria looked at her with sad, knowing eyes. I hope you do, but you can't take care of him if you're starving yourself. Please, use the resources we're giving you. Take care of yourself so you can take care of him. 5 weeks after their Social Security was suspended, Dorothy received a letter. Her hands shook as she opened it, terrified of what it might say. The letter was from Social Security. After reviewing their documentation, the agency had determined that Dorothy and Frank were eligible for benefits. However, there was a problem. The flag on their account had been triggered because someone with a similar name had been reported deceased, and the records had been confused. It was a mistake, a simple bureaucratic mistake. Their benefits would be reinstated within 7 to 10 business days. Back payments for the missed months would be deposited after that, another 2 to 3 weeks for processing. Dorothy read the letter 3 times, and then she called Frank at the hospital to tell him. He was still too weak to come home, but the doctors said he was improving now that he was receiving proper nutrition. It's over, she told him, her voice breaking. It's finally over. Thank God, Frank whispered. Then after a pause, Dorothy, I'm sorry I couldn't take care of you. I'm sorry you had to go through this alone. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither of us did. The system failed us. She wiped her eyes. But we survived. We're still here. 10 days later, the deposits appeared. Dorothy's first act was to go to the grocery store and buy real food, chicken, vegetables, fruit, everything they'd been unable to afford. She cooked a proper meal and brought it to Frank at the hospital, and they ate together in his room. 2 weeks after that, Frank was discharged. He was weaker than before, needed more help with daily tasks, but he was alive. They were together. The experience changed them in ways they were still discovering. Months later, Dorothy had always been optimistic, believing that if you worked hard and followed the rules, things would work out. But that optimism was gone now, replaced by constant anxiety. She checked their bank account multiple times daily, terrified the money would disappear again. She kept copies of every document, every piece of paper that might prove their existence. Frank struggled with depression and guilt. He hated that Dorothy had nearly starved herself to keep him fed. He hated being too weak to protect her. His therapist told him it wasn't his fault, but Frank couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed. They attended a support group now, elderly people who had experienced similar crises with Social Security or Medicare. They heard stories of people who had lost homes, health, hope because of bureaucratic mistakes. There should be a safety net, Dorothy said at one meeting. These systems are supposed to help us, not destroy us. An older woman nodded. But there isn't. We're invisible to them, just numbers in a computer. 6 months after the nightmare began, a local news station did a story on Social Security errors. They interviewed Dorothy and Frank on camera. The story aired on Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, Dorothy's phone was ringing constantly. Other elderly people sharing their stories, social workers offering resources, and a lawyer who specialized in class action lawsuits. What happened to you happens to thousands every year, the lawyer explained. The system is broken. Would you be willing to be part of a lawsuit? Dorothy looked at Frank, who nodded. Yes, she said. If it means helping others avoid what we went through, then yes. The lawsuit would take years. They might not see the results in their lifetime, but they filed their testimony, shared their documents, and became part of something bigger than themselves. Because at 76 and 78, after 51 years of marriage and a lifetime of work, Dorothy and Frank Martinez had learned the hardest lesson of all. The systems designed to protect the vulnerable could also destroy them. And the only way to change that was to fight back, even when you were tired, even when you were scared, even when you had almost nothing left. You fought back, because someone had to, and because the alternative, accepting that this was just how things were, was worse than any nightmare they had already lived through.